My name is Pat McQueenie. I'm the president of the Eden Prairie Chamber of Commerce and want to thank you all for joining us for this special webinar. I also want to thank our partners, the Southwest Metro Chamber, and I know their President Darren's on our webinar as well. Darren, do you want to do a quick welcome
yeah, I'll just be real brief, Pat. Thank you so much, Pat. And hi, everybody. Darren Noble, Executive Director of the Southwest Metro Chamber of Commerce. We're also joined by our other staff, Kelly Darcourt. She's our Event Program Manager. And I'll just be brief and say thank you for attending and look forward to connecting with all of you going forward this month and beyond.
Great, great. Today's program, as you are well aware, is really targeted and focused on manufacturing. And Darren and I are very happy to have Chamber member Fafinski, Mark, and Johnson as our presenter. The topic today is resilience in manufacturing, how to continue and build COVID-19 resistant businesses. And our presenter today is Jim Seifert, the head of manufacturing practice group at Fafinski, Mark, and Johnson. Jim is a former Ecolab executive vice president and general counsel. He holds a master's degree in manufacturing systems and is a licensed patent attorney. As I mentioned earlier, this is a joint program between the Eden Prairie and Southwest Metro Chambers. And Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm just going to remind individuals to mute yourself, and Jim will handle questions as we go or highlight that. And Jim, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks very much, Pat. Thanks, Darren, and welcome everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you because I get to do perhaps my favorite professional activity, and that is to talk manufacturing, all about manufacturing to manufacturers. So it's a real privilege for me to be with you this afternoon. Next slide, Georgie. 2 minutes on my background. So I come to you with 36 years of representing relatively large manufacturers. My last role was as Vice President General Counsel of Ecolab, as Pat mentioned. But now I'm chasing my dream. I'm a partner with Fafinski, Mark, and Johnson. I'm really your neighbor. We're based in Eden Prairie. And what I get to do is to talk to and help solve problems that manufacturers have on a day-to-day basis. So the point of this is that my comments today are not only going to be based on this relatively rich history of representing large manufacturers, but it's going to be based on the day-to-day problems that I hear about and engage in with manufacturers and to solve given these highly unusual circumstances. And so I hope this is a high value presentation for you today because it's going to be based on creating a more resilient manufacturing firm in light of two drivers. And this is where we're going to structure our time today. I'm going to naturally talk about COVID. That'll be first. I'm going to talk a little bit about public policy because those two drivers really are the main impetus for the need, the absolute need to have a more resilient manufacturing firm today going forward. It's interesting. One of my clients we talked about, I said, well, how's your strategic planning going? And they said, well, our strategic planning is really for the next 60 to 90 days. And the 3 to 5 year plan notion model that you hear out of business schools is out the window. And so this is about giving you the tools, giving you the perspective in terms of how to get through not only the next 60 to 90 and maybe 120 days, but then to give you that ability to look out a little longer and to get back into a normal cadence of your business. So let's get right into it. Next slide. We'll talk about COVID first. So this is the way the COVID world looked, the highly uncertain COVID world looked in April of this year. These two charts come from the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy at the University of Minnesota, which, by the way, is perhaps the definitive source of straight talk, plain English information on COVID. But there were these three scenarios. This relatively, we're going to bump along into the future. Then this fall spike scenario, which is mirrored exactly the way the cases played out in the 1918 Spanish flu. And then there was this other speculation in terms of we'd have this spike and then it would just even along and it would be this sort of, background flu-like disease. And it's been anything but that. And so this is what the speculation was from the experts as we looked into the future as of April 30th. Next slide, please. And so the fall spike scenario, which was what the most likely one was, and which mirrors exactly the 1918 flu scenario, is how it has played out. We were sitting here in May, June, July, we kept hearing about hundreds of cases, and that was concerning to us, an occasional death now and then. We did have days when there were no deaths, but sure enough, we got into the fall season, and now we're sitting here with 5,000-6,000 cases a day on a national level. We've gone from 20 to 30,000 cases. The high during the summer was 32,000 cases a day. Now it's up to 170 to 200,000. There is speculation from Mike Osterholm at the U that we're going to go on a national level and approach 300,000 cases, which just, if you pause and think about it, it's just an absolute tragedy from a public health standpoint, from a national standpoint, certainly from a human standpoint. And so this is a huge driver for people that have to carry on their businesses. They have to support their employees. They have to support their customers day to day. But this is something which is obviously has to be front and center in terms of understanding it, what it means, and then certainly how to react to it and make your business more resilient. Next slide, please. And so the solution, obviously now, is the vaccine. And I've given this presentation throughout the fall, and I used to say that a safe, effective, and widely available was years away, but in a stunning and miraculous way, it's now only months away. And the reason it's stunning and miraculous is because it was so improbable. In the past 25 years, there was only been 7 really new vaccines. And Ken Frazier, who is the CEO of Merck, one of the great developers of vaccines, said in July that officials who were promising a rapid vaccine development and by the end of the year were doing a grave disservice. Well, Mr. Frazier and many other scientists have proven all to be wrong. And then if you think about this in terms of the backdrop of the fastest vaccine that's been developed, the Ebola vaccine, it took 5 years. And here this vaccine has been developed within 12 months. It's a stunning reflection of what we've been able to accomplish as a nation, and certainly the scientific and business community and the impetus from the various governmental agencies have resulted in the fact that we now have 3 viable vaccines that are now proven safe and effective and will likely be approved and then rolled out. And that's what I'd like to talk about next. Next slide. So the rollout looks something like this. Pfizer's applied for their approval. It should come this week. Moderna's submitted their approval. They submitted it in the UK, I think today. It should be submitted to the FDA this week. And the way this is going to work is Pfizer will distribute their vaccine throughout its own proprietary network. All the other vaccines will be done through McKesson and their centralized network. They're a huge distributor to regional distributors throughout the country. And that's probably the most efficient way to do that. Relative to the allocation, the CDC came out this morning that the priority will be frontline healthcare workers first, then those in nursing facilities will be next. And then really, I think all the governors will follow this, but then it's going to be up to the governors to fine tune the distribution for their own particular states because they are going to be the final arbiters of who actually gets this. It's going to be, a huge logistical issue to have full maximum immunity. You're going to have to get, 2 doses 4 to 6 weeks apart, kind of like the new shingles shot. In terms of when this is all going to come to pass, assuming that Pfizer gets their approval this week, there's supposed to be, and this is the latest from the Army logistics general who's in charge of this, there should be 20 million doses, available for the whole country. So, we've got 320 million people in the country. This isn't going to happen anytime soon, but it's a start, and there's great reason for optimism. So, early on in this development, this is just kind of a footnote. Early on in this development, the Pfizer vaccine was identified as positive and most likely. And so they've been engaged in manufacturing, hoping that the actual results with these large population tests would actually prove out, and they have proven out to really a stunning degree. So they've been manufacturing this, and so the vaccines are available. Now it's just a question of ramping up the manufacturing even more. Perhaps you as manufacturers can sympathize with the logistics challenges here and getting it out to the states. Thereafter, 20 to 30 million doses will be available, and certainly by the summer. So think late second quarter, early third quarter. Most Americans who, let's just say, are not in the priority list should be able to get a COVID vaccine if they want it, and it should be available at their local clinics. So it's very, very interesting to see this play out. One of the big questions is, for those who have had COVID, should they get a vaccine? And it is recommended that they do, because the level of residual immunity from receiving, having had the disease already is quite uncertain. So as a matter of just almost common sense, those that have had COVID should actually get the vaccine when it's available. Next slide, please. And so that's COVID. Let's talk about public policy, because the current material risk, and it's all enhanced risk in the face of COVID and other factors, really has implications for how each manufacturer deals with their own situation. And so my comments will necessarily be more general, but you know as well as I do that these bits of advice really have to be digested through your own individual circumstance. But nevertheless, many of these risks will apply to most manufacturers. Certainly the COVID risk, certainly there's political risk on both the state and federal level. Really, there's a lot of different policies depending upon who's leading the individual states. And certainly on the federal level, we're seeing now there's going to be a wholesale change in new policy direction as we go forward. The economic risks are very significant. Harkening back to the May and June timeframe, the government spent somewhere between $2 and $3 trillion, which was at that time 10% of our total deficit. And we spent it within a matter of 60 days. And it was that we kind of shrugged our shoulders, but this was a stunning spending of federal money. And it has huge implications for how that's going to be made up. Where is the money going forward going to come from? On the federal budget level as well as the state level, you basically have finite receipts and variable expenses. As a business person, this is not a good formula, and that's why we run deficits so large at the federal level. And certainly at the state, we have this good news this week, at least in the near term, where we went, if you hearken back to February, we were in $2 billion surplus, then we went to $4 billion deficit. And now with this newest forecast, we've got a surplus coming up. So the pressure is off for the near term in Minnesota, because if we were to have to go forward with this $4 billion deficit, that had significant implications for tax increases for both individuals and for businesses. Relative to what the some corners of the expert world are saying, McKinsey, I cited this article they had in the Harvard Business Review, I believe, where they said, because of what we went through this year and the economic implications, things aren't going to return back to, quote, normal, that is 2019 levels, until 2025. So we've had a lot of, economic earthquakes this year in various levels, various ways, various sectors of the economy. And we have to climb out of this hole that's been created directly by COVID. There's a lot of policy out there relative to tax increases, corporate, personal, capital gains, real estate, estate, healthcare. There's a lot in play at the policy level, both at the state and the federal level. Other risks certainly are societal. We all have seen this close up in Minnesota. We think now, because of the vaccine, we're going to get through this social distancing issue relative to schools. And that's fantastic. It's been terrible. Anybody who has school-age children knows it's almost nearly an impossible task to work and maintain the schedule that the schools are putting on students relative to social distancing and distance learning. And then supply chains. Just to refresh everybody, going back to 2008, let's just say your bankers are part of your supply chain, and going back to 2008, there were certain bankers who simply said, we're not going to live up to your credit agreements. Well, this is comparable to what's going on in supply chains. We see some supply chains for some of our clients backing away from their commitments. And so this is yet another risk. And I would strongly encourage you to test your own supply chains as to whether they can deliver going forward, given all these circumstances. Because, if you go back to the Enterprise Minnesota State of Manufacturing survey that came out in November, Bob Kill, I thought, did a great job. And it's this whole economic cycle this year has not been uniform in terms of how it's affected manufacturers. In my own experience, I would say a third have been severely stressed by COVID and all of the consequences of the pandemic. A third have kind of treaded water. They're just getting through it. And then, the rest, a lot of people have thrived in the face of new market dynamics going forward. But the people who are going through a really tough time have had supply chains that have collapsed. And so to the extent there's any question about whether your supply chain could perform under these highly unusual circumstances, it's always good to confirm those relationships, because at least in my experience, and certainly reflective of the Enterprise Minnesota survey, some supply chains are not delivering as they had pre-COVID. Next slide. So here's a list of manufacturers that are thriving. There's great examples out there. My old employer, Ecolab, is doing well. Their restaurant business is down, but their business relative to food production, hospitals, beverage manufacturers and processors are up. Intuitive Surgical, a robotic surgical company in California, is doing well. IBM's doing really well relative to their cloud business. Rockwell is doing great relative to their automation. Microsoft is thriving because of the increased demands for digital sales. Home Depot is doing really well because of this new home-centered lifestyle, which is emerging out of people staying at home. People are doing home improvements, all the stuff that they've ignored for all these years. Now people have time because of remote work. They have got time throughout their day, and they can focus on this, and they're doing it. And it's really driving some stunning financial results. Fast casual dining, people can't sit down for fine dining, and so people still love to go out to eat. They love the variation it represents and variety it represents. And so fast casual of a curbside pickup, it's just taking off. I have some friends who are in this world, and they said their business has never been better. So this is the 30 to 40% that I mentioned that are absolutely thriving in the face of these really unusual circumstances. Next slide. And so more practically, the nuts and bolts of how to become more resilient, let's get into that. And there's 4 or 5 major areas. Next slide. So these are the areas I want to look at. And again, this is based on the resiliency framework that I want to lay out here, is really based on what I have seen, what I see day to day, but also based on these 35 budget cycles, 36 budget cycles that I've been through. And I don't want to dismiss that part of my experience because, you know, although going back and obviously dating myself a little bit, that was obviously pre-cell phone. It was pre-personal computer. It was pre-internet. But what the interesting thing is about that experience versus today is the similarity. If I had to kind of boil it down, it came down to what drove a successful year versus a subpar year, what drove results that were really unexpected versus disappointing results were 2 basic things: taking care of the customer and innovation. And to do that, and now what technology's done, it has driven those 2 factors in highly innovative, highly unusual, highly customized ways. And so the whole notion of customization for the individual customer has really been driven by technology. And that was something that Peter Drucker really focused in on in the 90s. And because of technology, manufacturers are able to do that. But nevertheless, these 4 areas really are what I'm seeing as how manufacturers are responding to today's conditions and making, in the process, their business more resilient. So let's get on with it. On the expense side, my clients are looking at all non-sales indirect related expenses and costs. And for those sort of non-customer facing efforts, seeking structural discounts. You as a manufacturer are an economic entity. You are somebody's customer and they want to keep you. They want to keep their business going. So don't underestimate your power as a customer. And what I'm seeing is my clients going out and asking for discounts, you know, in that sort of 7 to 15% range, and then getting them. And what I say is structural discounts, it's permanent, it's going forward. It's not just, we're going to give you a discount for 30 to 60 days. They're going out a year or more and getting these discounts. And that they can be quite significant depending upon the scale of your supply chain. Re-examining non-customer facing functional overhead is a related issue. And then just looking at, you know, how can you get by without overhead that is not generating sales or ultimately going to give you lower cost in the near term. And so all non-customer facing functional overhead, my clients are looking at and making some hard decisions about how they want to see their business going forward. And certainly for those businesses that are in that treading water area or those businesses that are really having trouble hanging on, this is just a given, and they have to lower their overall cost of doing business in order to size their business to the actual market that they are serving currently. Reevaluating real estate. This is an interesting one because I think, you know, you read a lot of Wall Street Journal headlines saying, you know, we're never coming back to the office. Well, from what I see, both in terms out there seeing and reading about the anecdotal evidence, as well as what my own clients are seeing, is that it's different for each company. Certainly, I think by and large, and I'm saying, you know, 75% or more of the companies that I deal with, many more people are going to be working at home. But the notion of, you know, shutting down headquarters or having, you know, 95% of your employees working remotely, I'm not really seeing that because it hits, you know, each business so differently. Now, at the corporate level, maybe you can do sales, maybe you do customer service more remotely. But manufacturers are about making things. They're about showing up at a facility and having people do work, convert raw materials into a finished product. And you can't do that remotely, by and large. And so it's something that I would strongly encourage you to reevaluate. Perhaps you were going to add an addition to your office space, and that now comes under a reevaluation given how you're going to work going forward. And so I would just encourage you, as many of my clients have, to look at that on an individual basis and not just think, oh, you know, I'm reading in the paper or my friend told me that they're going to have 50% of their employees work from home. And so I should probably be doing that. I wouldn't go down. I'd really get into the real nitty gritty of what works for you as an individual firm. Manufacturing structural costs will likely rise due to COVID prevention. People are going to expect this. They're going to want to know how often are you cleaning and sanitizing common surfaces and this kind of thing. And so you're going to see a rise in expenses in many areas. And so hence further need to lower your costs in others. What we're also seeing is many people who were hesitant about digitizing their sales process are really going forward with this. There's huge efficiencies to be had with digitizing the sales process as much as possible. Many firms can't do that. I understand that. It's based on relationships and whatnot. But you know, digitizing can take many forms. It can be as simple as being able to sort of master the Zoom or team universe for doing face-to-face sales as much as possible, getting the presentation down, making sure your equipment is good to the extent you have to demonstrate a product or process remotely. But that's part of digitizing your sales process. And there's really great efficiencies, both in terms of time and costs to taking this big step. A lot of people think about it. A lot of people don't know how to do it. But nevertheless, there's time available. There's extra time available to go down the road and make this part of your permanent offering going forward in your permanent processes. Next slide. On the talent side, going back to the Enterprise Minnesota State of Manufacturing surveys, I think for the past 5 years, the number one issue that people talked about wasn't taxes. It wasn't really healthcare, although that was near the top. It wasn't about the surrounding business environment. It wasn't about competition or any other, governmental policy that was affecting them. It was about talent and the shortage of talent. And now we're in an area, in an environment where it may be the best time to restructure your organization and the right time to strike the right talent mix. Certainly in the beginning of the COVID year we've gone through, the unemployment went up, way over 10%. Now it's dialed back a bit. The current 6% unemployment in Minnesota shows, things are different than they were. We were down at 4% unemployment pre-COVID, and now that number, of course, has gone up 50%. But nevertheless, it's not the disaster that many people thought was going to come to the forefront. But nevertheless, there's still a lot of manufacturing talent. I myself, I get solicited by people who have been in the manufacturing management world, principally on the sales side, directors of engineering, directors of operations. People are out there and they want to work and they're seasoned and they can step right in. And so given the fact that there's this pressure that's eased a little bit relative to the talent pool that's out there, now might be the right time to strike and start recruiting for that talent mix. Because if you think about this, as we go through these next 2 quarters where we're going to have this anxiousness about the vaccine, its availability, You know, there's going to be some you know, fits and starts here in terms of when it comes online for us. Let's just call it Main Street Minnesotans. The second half of 2021, there should be a huge spike in economic activity as people ease back into a normal pattern of living. They'll start traveling again. They'll start being more comfortable getting together in groups. They'll start getting, you know, on airplanes. And so there should be a fairly significant snapback of economic activity, and it's going to take people to take advantage of that. And so I would strongly encourage you, as again, as many of my clients had, look at your talent, your organization, and see whether there are gaps where you need, you know, even a senior leader or maybe even a not so senior leader who can be a difference maker for you going forward, because this window's going to close once there's this snapback of the economy and these people get snapped up by other firms. And so talent is a really a big area. You can buy machines, but sometimes that talent puzzle is very, very hard to solve. And it's obviously been an issue from many, many manufacturers as it's come through this Enterprise Minnesota survey. Next slide. So new markets. This is really a question of perspective. Given COVID, a lot of people were thinking, okay, you know, what I've got to reduce my expenses. I've got to get my overhead down. Certainly that's common sense. But in terms of the perspective of saying, well, this may be an opportunity to expand my business. There may be opportunities that present themselves, which I've never seen before. And many firms, and those are the ones that I listed, you know, have looked at this period as saying, how can I take what I do and enter new markets, either that present themselves obviously, or that I've been thinking about just kind of right next door to my traditional or more comfortable markets, and seeing what opportunities exist there. I know that's what Ecolab has done. They put together a basket of services and product offerings and created a whole new segment, and they call it Science Certified. And what it means is that if you go to Ecolab customers, whether it's a hotel or any sort of lodging or public space, and they're an Ecolab customer, you can now have more assurance, and it's a message to the public that business owners know to have an Ecolab Science Certified. You're seeing national campaign about this as well. And it's been a very, very successful way of looking at the world, seeing the demand for in practically cleaner spaces, but then message-wise, to assure the public that when they go out and go somewhere, that it is Ecolab Science Certified, that it gives this assurance to the public. It's great for Ecolab. Certainly, it's a whole new market segment that wasn't present pre-COVID, and it's great for the customer and certainly for the public. And so this is one really, really significant example of how, through perspective, you can increase your business by seeing these new markets that are emerging. Certainly, new markets are being created by, you know, return to U.S. manufacturing. To the extent that you're a U.S. manufacturer, you know, that should be touted, because people want to know that whatever you're providing is more certain because it's made in the United States. Third bullet point, anything related to cleaning and sanitizing services, you know, beyond what the Ecolabs of the world do, anything that can be done so you don't have lots of people touching common surfaces, that's a new market. Remote workspaces are a new market. As I said, anything related to remodeling, customization of living spaces. I know in my own neighborhood, people are doing all sorts of addition because they're getting after it and they see a different future. And I think we are going to have a different future. This is our year of COVID, but I think, you know, it's like after 9/11, we just we lived a different life. And I think COVID is restructuring our society, and we're going to be living a different life. And I think it's going to be this more local living, this more, certainly in the near term, it's going to be this more home-centered living. And so that is going to drive different economic behavior and different choices by consumers. Virtual schooling, that will continue on and off. I think, you know, through the winter and spring quarters and the winter semester, but that nevertheless will drive purchases that and businesses that support that. We have in Minnesota, we have a very large school furniture custom manufacturing firm, and I know a lot of this is driving that business as well. Home health is another big thing. People are very reluctant to go to a clinic or hospital setting simply because there's more bugs running around. So anything that can drive home health, home diagnosis is really going to be a new market that I think is here to stay. As I mentioned, anything related to digital selling, non-contact selling, I think that will be a permanent restructuring of how business was done pre-COVID. And then again, this is kind of a comment about public policy and business structures. I think one of the huge and I think really correct policy programs that the Biden administration is going to implement is a let's just call it, you know, a Depression era like infrastructure government program, where it will engage in lots of improvements for public buildings, public spaces, roads, airports, infrastructure within the cities. And this is going to be part of the snapback. And so this will have implications for construction, materials, machines, material handling equipment, because I think this will be one of the most efficient ways of jumpstarting the economic recovery. And so look for that as well as an area where it will be a new market, given the type of government spending, which I think, you know, it's a virtual certainty is around the corner. You know, we probably did the right thing this summer in terms of protecting employment through the CARES Act and the PPP loans that were out there, and that was part of this $2 trillion that I referenced. But it doesn't give you anything long term. It secures the short-term future, and it avoids certainly a lot of human pain and suffering, which is important. But in terms of, you know, the overall long-lasting economic recovery and infrastructure program makes more sense in terms of the next step. And look for that. And obviously that's going to take some preparation to think about that if one is going to take advantage of it. Next slide. And so opportunities within existing markets. I referenced the Ecolab Science Certified initiative. It's really been great. You know, within existing markets, you might think about your own customers and getting more share of their customers. And one strategy, which, you know, I've seen and actually repeated in various ways, is to Zoom with 25% of your customers once a month as a strategy. I know this has resulted in new business for the clients that I know of that have engaged in this. It's really a great tool. Interestingly, although people, I think, you know, often can do without another Zoom call, for a short 10-minute call. Hi, how are you? What do you need? Or what we're providing meets your needs. It's really an efficient tool and has generated, and I've seen firsthand, more business because you're there, you're in front of the customer. And this is obviously fantastic when your customers are remote. You don't have to get in your car or get on an airplane and spend a day for a half-hour meeting just because you want to check in on your customers. So using Zoom or Team is really a fantastic way of getting closer to your customer, engaging in more customer intimacy, and ultimately creating a new market by getting more share of your existing customers and market. We've also seen customers creating what I would refer to as value lines, that is lower priced. They deliver almost the same result, but are at a lower price and hence represent a better value. We represent a custom door manufacturer, a custom wood door manufacturer, and this is exactly what they did. And now these are high-end products, but nevertheless, with a value line, it has expanded their markets. And typically, they've driven with a previous line, gone to market with a previous line. Now with a value line, they are reaching more customers and expanding the business. And so this is a very, very good, and I think proven. It's not original, but certainly it's a way of getting more market share in a different market segment, understanding what the current economic pressures are for certain customers. You know, as I mentioned before, there's certainly you should think about increasing capacity as the really economic activity is going to zoom up in the second half of next year. And you know, in terms of you know, this new lifestyle, anything related to homesteader lifestyle is going to be a market that I think has expanded and will continue to expand. And it's everything from remodeling to gardening to hobbies. And so this is there's enormous opportunities here. And I think your customers are seeing these dynamics as well. So in some sense, and I've seen just, you know, tidbits of these types of conversations, maybe it's just a question of you getting a hold of your customers and saying, how are you seeing 2021 play out? And then reacting to those soft signals that you get in those kinds of conversation. It's going to be an interesting year because it will be a new set of pressures and opportunities as we go forward into 2021. But in the shadow of the vaccine, it's a reason to be very hopeful as we move forward to a new set of dynamics that, although, okay, it's not going to be, 2019 where we just saw, this nice expansion and we thought, next year was going to be just like this year. It's different. And so there's going to have to be a new approach to understanding the customers, understanding where they're going to spend their money and why, and what their drivers are going forward. Interestingly, I also want to comment on supply chains. Although there's a move for coming back to the U.S. and opening up U.S.-based facilities, the whole notion of a global supply chain is not going away. I think we've gone through a period of tariffs. We can talk about that in the Q&A. And tariffs, by and large, I think have been ineffective. Certainly, it's not a long-term solution to trade issues. And it's in my experience, the tariffs have simply hurt manufacturers here. And the government trying to give a little support program here, a little support program there to deal with the effects of tariff really has been ineffective. And what I'm hoping for in the future is that we continue to have, open trade borders, and really it ultimately on a net basis helps U.S. manufacturers as we go forward. And I think that's something that we can rely on. The other thing that I want to put forth and in terms of for your consideration is there's going to be a lot of policy suggestions and proposals at the state level. And to the extent that you're not engaged in knowing who your legislator is or putting your opinion out in terms of how particular policy should be shaped, I would encourage you to do so. One of the things Pat didn't mention, but I'm a former state legislator, and Minnesota, given its relatively small population relative to, let's say a place like New York, California, Texas, the state legislators are still accessible. And more importantly, your opinion as a manufacturer, as somebody who employs people who are part of the absolute foundation of the state, you have huge power that most manufacturers don't understand. And so when you hear something in the news or you read a policy analysis, don't be afraid to write an email, write a letter, ideally take a couple, 3 hours out of your day and set up an appointment and actually meet with the legislator face to face. You will have an enormous influence on that legislator when you step out and raise your voice in a logical, reasonable way about a particular policy that's before the legislature. I've experienced this hundreds of times where a citizen who simply showed up had their opinion or their viewpoint adopted because there was nothing contrary and it seemed logical, and it was put into bills that ultimately became law. So don't be afraid to do that. So with that, we've got about 10 minutes left. I'd be happy to take any questions, and I really, really appreciate your time. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Jim. In questions, anyone? I think everybody currently is muted. So if you want to jump in with a question, please unmute yourself, or you can always type into the raise your hand piece of Zoom. Jim, in some of the pieces you shared with us, is there key dynamics that are impacting Minnesota versus other parts of the country that people should keep in mind too?
I think the COVID case dynamics are very significant. We are having an unusual spike, and I think it probably has to do, with the Minnesota culture. We love to get together. We love social gatherings. We love weddings. We are very respectful of people when they pass away and getting together for funerals. We love family gatherings, and I think people have been much too casual about those events driving COVID cases. And so the best way to hug your friends and hug your relatives is to not be with them. This is all about, these cases are driven by exchanging air, and you don't have to exchange too much air to actually get it. I know Mike Osterholm fairly well, and I've had access to him, and I emailed to him, and it's just, we have to stay apart from each other for at least the next 4 to 8 weeks. And that's the added dynamic, Pat.
Great. Any additional questions that attendees may have? And I'm keeping an eye on our chat area here too.
Yeah.
Being a former legislator, is there certain items you're hearing that either at the federal or state level? Obviously, there's a relief package being discussed at the federal level, and Minnesota got some good news on budgeting purposes yesterday. Is there items that you've heard that people should keep an eye on right out of the gate?
Yeah, absolutely. Really, it's the age-old issue around taxes. I think overall, and again, this is not a political discussion in any way, shape, or form. I think Governor Walz, he's doing a good job in a highly uncertain environment. But nevertheless, we haven't seen any significant furloughs or layoffs at the state agency. We haven't seen any significant reduction in salaries, although there has been some at the University of Minnesota. And so you have a situation where, depending upon what the demands are, where there's an applied tax increase, and to the extent those come to the forefront, and obviously that's going to be very well known, you should weigh in on that in terms of how it would affect your particular business. Minnesota continues to be a very good place to do business, I think, for manufacturing, because it's a rich manufacturing community. I think the University of Minnesota and other schools, Dunwoody, Alexandria Tech, others produce really good thought leaders and practical talent for the shop floor. And so it's a good place to open up a business. We're actually, you hear a lot about manufacturers leaving. There's some that are moving here. There was the Silicon Valley firm that just moved to Eden Prairie, a very significant Silicon Valley firm. And that's because we've got a great talent pool. It's an ethical environment and people work hard. And those are great drivers for manufacturing. But nevertheless, the legislature is a funny place, and you're going to see some wacky ideas come out, and you just shouldn't say, oh, nobody will ever vote for that. Well, if you don't participate, people will vote for it. And so just pay attention. And if something doesn't sit right with you, do not be afraid to write that little email. Every one of these legislators, both in the House and the Senate, have paid staff to look at every email that comes into their office. And so your emails will not be lost. And it's one of the virtues of our government here is that, they're there and they listen to the citizens. So participate. That's what people should do. Pay attention and participate.
Great. We have a question here, Jim, and I'll read it to you. It says, I'm in local government. Right now, the focus is on small, locally owned businesses. What can we do at the local level to support our manufacturers during this time?
One of the things you could do as a government is understand the training programs that are available at the state. The Job Skills Partnership Board is a huge, huge source of customized training that people should know about. Most people do, but I never want to take that for granted. They will provide customized training for your business, whether you need, it's all the traditional trades, but if you need English as a second language, if you need refresher and math skills, if you need CNC training, if you need certainly any sort of welding, if you need marketing training, if you need trade, dealing with a customer overseas, getting through trade barrier training. This is all available through the Minnesota Job Skills Partnership Board. I was on that board for 10 years, and it was just remarkable in terms of the value of the training and then ultimately what the result has been at the operational level. Typically what they do, that the state does, is it partners with a local technical college, and between the technical college and the firm, they decide what the customized curriculum would be, and then it's actually delivered by the technical college on site typically. It's a stunning program, but that's just one. So the local governments should have an up-to-date list of all the training programs that are available from the state, as well as if there's a technical college in their backyard, they should know what that curriculum looks like as well. Minnesota's technical colleges are a real gem, and they're very, very oriented toward customized training, and the local governments can facilitate that kind of customized training.
And is that a little bit of a follow-up question on that, given that so much remote learning is now taking place, is that an opportunity to help expedite some of the learning?
That would be perfect, whether you want to digitize your sales or whether you want to get very skilled very quickly at remote work, either through the school themselves or through the Job Skills Partnership Board or through the Department of Economic and Employment Development. That's also a good source. But I'm just kind of cutting through the red tape. If you go to the Job Skills Partnership Board, I'll bet they have a solution to this.
Great. I think we may have time for maybe a final question if anybody has one, either unmute yourself, or you can submit it via the chat function. Going once, going twice. All right. Well, Jim, if people do have a follow-up question, what's the easiest way to reach you? There you go.
There you go. I think we're going to send out this deck to people who want to see it. But yeah, feel free to reach me. I'll you know, I can give out my cell number. It's 612-770-7999. And feel free to call me on my cell as well. You know, for me, all I do is talk to manufacturers all day long, and I really, really love to see Minnesota manufacturers thrive and get through this next period to a new level of prosperity.
Great, great. Well, thank you again, Jim, for your time. Just as a side note, we did record this session. As Jim highlighted, we have the slide deck, so we will be sharing that with everyone as well. We appreciate your time. And Jim, again, thank you. Enjoy our holiday season as best you can in a safe and hopefully fun manner. And we will see you at our next events. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Take care.